What in the name of God are you doing to my son? The question tore through the quiet opulence of the kitchen, sharp and jagged. Julian Croft stood frozen in the arched doorway, his body rigid, his breath caught in his throat. The leather of his briefcase, worth more than most people's cars, slipped from his numb fingers and hit the marble floor with a muffled thud. He didn't register the sound. His mind, usually a fortress of calculated risks and market predictions, was a maelstrom of primal fear. Every horrific headline he had ever skimmed flashed behind his eyes. All he could process was the image before him. His 4-year-old son, Leo, small and naked, sitting in a large plastic basin inside the cavernous kitchen sink. And hovering over him was the woman he'd hired to dust antiques and polish silver, her dark hands on his child's pale body. A cold wave of panic washed over him, constricting his throat. For one terrible, distorted moment, his brain bypassed all logic, all context. He didn't see a gentle touch. He saw a violation. He didn't see concern. He saw a threat. "Get your hands off him!" he snarled, the words clawing their way out of his chest, raw and guttural. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Sarah looked up, her movements unhurried, her large, dark eyes wide but surprisingly calm, as if she had been anticipating this very storm. "He has a fever, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice soft but steady. "He was burning up. He's been crying for hours. This is a remedy my grandmother used, and her mother before her. A warm bath in a contained space helps soothe the nerves and can bring a temperature down." Julian took a step forward, his face twisting with disbelief and rage at each word. "Oh, save me the folklore," he snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. "A maid is boiling my son like a lobster in a kitchen sink. Is this standard practice where you're from? Do you think this is some backyard in Alabama?" Sarah's mouth fell open slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "This isn't about where I'm from, sir." "Oh, yes, it is," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This is not some dilapidated shack in the Delta. This is my home. That is my son. And you are here to clean my house, not to practice your backwoods medicine on my child." Sarah's face crumbled. Her arms, still glistening with water from the bath, began to tremble. Yet she kept her voice even, refusing to meet his fire with her own. "I wasn't playing doctor, sir," she said, her words barely audible over the sound of his own ragged breathing. "I was just trying to help him." Leo, oblivious to the tempest raging above his head, splashed a small hand in the water, sending droplets onto the stainless steel faucet. "Daddy, look, I'm a submarine," he giggled. "Sarah says I'm the captain." The name Sarah, so casually and affectionately spoken, struck Julian like a physical blow. Sarah turned back to the boy, her movements now shaky as she lifted him from the water and wrapped him in a thick towel. She gently kissed Leo's forehead before bundling him securely. "I want you out of my house by nightfall," Julian said, his tone as cold and hard as the marble under his feet. "Leave your keys with Samuel. You should consider yourself lucky I'm not calling the police." For a beat, Sarah stood motionless, clutching the towel-wrapped child. Then, the fragile dam of her composure broke. Tears welled and spilled down her cheeks as she turned away from him. She made no sound at first, but then a single, gut-wrenching sob escaped. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She only whispered, "Yes, sir," as if the words themselves were stones she had to swallow. As Sarah walked away, Leo squirmed in his father's arms, reaching a small hand out. "No, Sarah! Don't go! I want Sarah!" Julian didn't answer, his arms tightening around his son as he watched Sarah's retreating figure vanish down the long, silent hallway. Hours later, the mansion was unnervingly quiet. Julian sat in his study, a fire unlit in the grate, a glass of untouched scotch sweating on the table beside him. Samuel, the butler who had served the Croft family for more than 30 years, stood silently in the doorway, his presence a quiet judgment. "She wept all the way to the gate, you know," Samuel said finally, his voice low and resonant. Julian didn't look at him. "She overstepped." "She saved your boy a trip to the emergency room," Samuel countered, his tone respectful but firm. "She bathed him in a sink," Julian retorted, unable to release the image. "She comforted him," Samuel corrected gently. "What you perceived as a boundary, that little boy perceived as a fortress." Julian let out a sharp, frustrated breath. He grabbed the tablet from his desk and pulled up the security system. Kitchen. He scrolled back through the timeline. 2:17 p.m. The image flickered to life. He saw Sarah lifting a distressed, whimpering Leo into her arms, whispering softly to him. He watched her test the water with her wrist, not once, but 3 times. He saw her pour it with painstaking care over his small back. And then he heard her singing. It was a simple, quiet melody. "Go to sleep, little one. Go to sleep." It was his wife's lullaby, the one she sang to Leo every single night. Julian's throat closed up. His finger jabbed at the screen, pausing the image. He remembered the simple, knitted scarf she had left on the entryway table, a soft gray wool. He had picked it up earlier, intending to throw it out. Now he pictured it again, imagining the scent not of expensive perfume, but of something simple, like soap and cinnamon, something maternal. Leo had stopped crying hours ago. He was sleeping soundly now, his breathing deep and even. His fever was gone. Julian rewound the footage, watching the way Sarah's hands held his son, not with the detached efficiency of an employee, but with an unmistakable tenderness. The way she looked at him was not with a sense of duty, but with profound, genuine care. The ugly words he'd hurled at her echoed in his mind. Backwoods medicine, dilapidated shack. He hadn't just insulted her actions, he had savaged her humanity. And for the first time that day, not from a place of pride or anger, but from a deep, hollowing shame, Julian Croft began to feel the crushing weight of his mistake. The stillness in the house was a physical presence. It was heavier than it had been in the months following his wife's death, more profound than the emptiness that greeted him after long business trips. Tonight, with Sarah gone, a new kind of void had settled into the very walls, an absence that grated on Julian's nerves like a dull blade. He sat on the edge of Leo's bed, the dim light from the hallway casting a pale glow on his son's sleeping face. A cool cloth rested on his forehead. His beloved stuffed giraffe, a gift from Sarah, was tucked securely under his arm. Leo had finally cried himself to sleep after Sarah left. Julian had tried to soothe him with awkward pats and clumsy reassurances, but it wasn't his father's presence that had brought peace. It was sheer, inconsolable exhaustion. He reached out, his hand hesitating before brushing a stray lock of hair from Leo's forehead. The boy's skin was cool and dry. The terrifying heat from earlier was gone, replaced by the healthy, pinkish hue of sleep. A part of Julian, the rational, scientific part, wanted to credit the children's acetaminophen he'd administered, but a quieter, more honest part of him knew that wasn't the whole story. He stood and pulled the door almost closed, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in the silence. The scarf was still on the console table in the hall, lying next to a small vase of wildflowers Sarah had picked from the edge of the woods and arranged a few days prior. She never asked for permission to bring parts of the outside world in. She just did it, as if she knew the house needed more life than he was capable of giving it. He picked up the soft wool, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. It was slightly frayed at the ends. He wondered if it had been her mother's. "A remedy my grandmother used," he muttered, the memory of her quiet explanation haunting him. She hadn't been defensive. She had spoken as if the lineage of that knowledge was its own validation. He tossed the scarf back on the table and retreated to the library. Samuel was there, as he was every evening, settled into a worn leather armchair with a book. "I see the fever has broken," Samuel observed, not looking up. "He's sleeping," Julian confirmed, pouring himself a drink and sinking into the chair opposite him. Samuel nodded. "That woman has a rare gift." Julian glanced at him over the rim of his glass. "Sarah?" "Yes," Samuel said, closing his book and setting it aside. "Her." Julian remained silent. Samuel leaned forward, his gaze direct. "You know, I have seen dozens of nannies, tutors, and housekeepers pass through these doors over the years. Most come for the paycheck. A few come out of a sense of obligation. But Sarah, she comes to this house as if she's answering a calling." Julian let out a short, bitter laugh. "A calling? She cleans houses for a living, Samuel." "No, sir," Samuel said, his voice dropping but losing none of its authority. "She cleans houses because life interrupted her plans to finish nursing school. Did you ever ask her why she had to leave her program? Did you even know she was in one?" Julian blinked, the information landing like a stone in his gut. Samuel continued, his tone firm but never disrespectful. "You see a maid. I see a woman who has been tending to your son's heart, while you've been tending to your portfolio. You can dismiss her, sir, but do not fool yourself into believing she wasn't the one holding this family together when it was at its most fragile." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were undeniably true. Julian stared into the amber liquid of his glass as the ice slowly melted. The silence stretched. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Where would she be staying?" Samuel raised a single eyebrow. "Why do you ask?" "I need to make sure she receives her final payment," Julian said quickly, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "And her scarf." Samuel gave a slow, knowing nod, seeing through the flimsy excuse, but choosing not to expose it. "She'll be at her grandmother's place in Oakhaven. I understand the old woman hasn't been well. Sarah goes there when she needs to. Reset." "Get me the address," Julian said, standing abruptly. "Are you planning on driving out there, sir?" Samuel asked. Julian hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "Tomorrow." Samuel allowed a small, wry smile to touch his lips. "Well, when you go, I suggest you bring more than a check and a scarf. That woman's pride is worth more than this entire estate." Julian didn't reply. He left the library, his mind a turbulent sea of regret and newfound information. Later that night, he found himself opening his laptop, something he rarely did for personal reasons. He typed Sarah Jennings into the search bar. The results were sparse. A few social media profiles, mostly private. But one link stood out. A local community college's website. An article from 2 years ago. Sarah Jennings, recipient of the St. Jude's Future of Healing Scholarship. The accompanying photo showed a younger, beaming Sarah in a crisp white lab coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck. The bio detailed her dream of becoming a pediatric nurse, her passion for serving underserved communities, her volunteer work at a children's shelter. At the bottom of the page was a single, stark update. Program status: paused indefinitely due to family emergency. Julian stared at the screen, the cursor blinking rhythmically in the oppressive silence of his study. He closed the laptop and leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning. How many people like her had he overlooked? People he judged in a single, arrogant glance. People quietly carrying burdens he couldn't even imagine. He thought of Leo's giggle echoing off the kitchen tiles as he splashed in the sink. Then he thought of Sarah's face as she left, humiliated, her quiet dignity shattered by his cruelty. And for the first time in a very long time, Julian Croft wasn't thinking about profit margins or corporate strategy. He was thinking about a debt he owed that could not be repaid with money, but only with humility. He stood and walked to Leo's room, peeking inside. The boy was still sound asleep, his fever completely gone. "Sarah," he murmured in his sleep. Julian felt a knot tighten in his chest. He closed the door gently and whispered to the empty, shadowed hallway, as if she could hear him across the miles. "I am so sorry." The following morning arrived with a low, gray sky and a persistent drizzle that tapped against the mansion's vast windows. Julian stood before the bathroom mirror, razor in hand, but his face remained untouched. His reflection was that of a tired, unshaven man, but his eyes were alert in a way they hadn't been for months. He had barely slept, his mind replaying Sarah's tear-streaked face, her quiet sob, the way she had held herself together even as he was tearing her apart. Downstairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, dark and strong, filled the air. Samuel was already in the kitchen. "She's in Oakhaven," he said, anticipating Julian's question. He slid a folded piece of paper across the granite countertop. "I took the liberty of getting the address." Julian took it with a nod. "I'll be back this evening." "Are you certain you're prepared for that particular conversation, sir?" Samuel asked, his attention fixed on polishing a silver tray. "I'm not certain of anything anymore," Julian admitted, "but I know I was wrong, and I know my son misses her." Samuel gave a short, approving grunt. "Then I suggest you take her scarf, and a sizable portion of humility." The drive to Oakhaven was a journey through worlds. The gleaming steel and glass of the city slowly gave way to smaller towns, then to rolling countryside laced with old fences and weathered barns. He passed through neighborhoods where houses had histories etched into their peeling paint and sagging porches. It wasn't poverty he was seeing, it was life, lived in and unpretentious. He found the address on a quiet street lined with ancient oak trees. The house was a modest, pale blue cottage, with a sprawling rose bush fighting a valiant battle against the encroaching ivy on the porch railing. A set of wind chimes sang a soft, dissonant tune in the damp air. He hesitated, the neatly wrapped scarf sitting on the passenger seat beside a cashier's check for an amount he knew was insultingly large. He left the check and took the scarf, stepping out of the car and crossing the wet street. The old screen door groaned in protest as he knocked. After a moment, the inner door opened a crack, and an elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes peered out. She wore a thick cardigan and a deeply skeptical expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy with age. Julian cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Sarah Jennings." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "My name is Julian Croft." He paused, the words, "I'm her employer," dying on his tongue. I came to return something she left." The door opened a little wider. "She's out back," the woman said. "Come on in, but leave your shoes on the mat. My floors have seen better days, but I still keep them clean." Julian complied, slipping off his expensive Italian loafers and stepping into a living room filled with the scent of lemon oil and old books. The space was humble but immaculate, every surface adorned with framed photographs and handmade doilies. "Didn't say she was expecting anyone," the woman called out as she shuffled down a narrow hallway. Then again, maybe she wasn't. A moment later, Sarah appeared at the end of the hall. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a faded university sweatshirt and worn jeans. Her eyes were puffy, whether from crying or a lack of sleep, he couldn't tell. She stopped dead when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a careful mixture of shock and suspicion. "I came to bring this back," he said, holding out the paper bag containing her scarf. He paused. "And?" she prompted, her arms crossing defensively over her chest. Julian looked at the floor, then forced himself to meet her gaze. "And to apologize." "For what exactly?" she asked, her voice gaining a sharp edge. "For calling me a backwoods medic? For accusing me of hurting your son? For humiliating me in front of a child who I happen to love?" Each question landed like a well-aimed stone. He deserved every one. Julian nodded slowly. "For all of it," he said, his own voice strained. "I was wrong. I was frightened. But that doesn't excuse what I said or how I made you feel." She stepped forward and took the bag, her fingers brushing against his for a fraction of a second. The brief contact was like an electric shock, not of romance, but of shared humanity. "I shouldn't have had to defend myself for caring for a sick child," she said, her voice low and firm, "especially in a house where he was all alone." "I know," he said quietly. There was a long pause. "My wife, she used to sing that lullaby to him," he added, the admission costing him more than he expected. "Leo hasn't smiled like that since she passed. I didn't even realize how much I missed it until I saw the video." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "You watched the footage?" "I was looking for proof that I was right," he admitted, shame coloring his words. "Instead, I found proof that I was a fool." Her eyes welled with fresh tears, but this time they weren't born of pain. "I never meant to overstep," she whispered. "I just saw him, so small and scared. And it reminded me of—" She trailed off. "You mentioned your grandmother used to do that?" "The bath?" he prompted. Sarah nodded. "When we were sick, and the clinic was too far or too expensive, that was her remedy. Hot water in the kitchen sink, a towel on the floor. She did what she knew. I learned from her." Julian looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw not a maid, but a woman of immense depth and quiet strength. "Sarah," he began, "would you consider coming back? Not as a housekeeper, as Leo's full-time caregiver. And more than that, I want to pay for you to finish your nursing degree, whatever it takes." She stared at him, stunned into silence. "I know I can't take back my words," he continued, pressing on. "But perhaps I can help you finish the work you were always meant to do." She wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "I'll have to think about it," she said finally. "I'm not ready to say yes. But I appreciate you coming here to say this to my face." "That's fair," he said. "Take all the time you need." As he turned to leave, her grandmother's voice called out from the kitchen. "You want to stay for some sweet tea, Mr. Croft? Might do that clenched jaw of yours some good." Julian managed a small smile. "Another time, ma'am. Thank you." He stepped back out into the drizzle, feeling a profound shift within him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Julian Croft was not a man accustomed to waiting. In his world, indecision was a fatal flaw, and patience was a luxury he rarely afforded himself or others. But in the days that followed his visit to Oakhaven, he found himself in an unfamiliar state of limbo. Sarah had not called. The grand, silent kitchen, once the scene of his shameful outburst, now felt like a courtroom where he awaited his verdict. The plastic basin was gone, the sink gleamed, but the memory of his cruelty lingered like a stain. Light, joyful footsteps suddenly echoed down the grand staircase. Leo, a whirlwind of superhero pajamas and blonde hair, burst into the room and scrambled onto his father's lap. "Daddy, when is Sarah coming back?" he asked, his small face clouded with a frown. Julian flinched inwardly. The question had become a daily refrain. In Leo's 4-year-old mind, Sarah wasn't an employee. She was a fixture, as essential as the sun. "She's visiting her grandmother, buddy," Julian said, choosing his words with care. "Why?" Leo persisted. "Is she sick like I was?" He swallowed. "No, she's fine. She just needed a little time away." Leo rested his head against his father's chest, a rare moment of stillness for the perpetually moving boy. "I want her to come home," he said quietly. "I miss her songs." Julian held him tighter, the simple, heartfelt words twisting something in his chest. "Me too, son. Me too." That evening, Julian found himself sitting on the floor of Leo's room, a picture book open in his lap. For the first time since his wife's passing, he was attempting to reclaim the bedtime ritual himself. He read with a stilted cadence, the familiar words feeling foreign on his tongue. But Leo didn't seem to notice. He listened intently, his eyelids growing heavy. When the story was over, the boy yawned and whispered, "You're not as good as Sarah, but you're trying." A small, sad smile touched Julian's lips. "Yeah, I am." He kissed Leo's forehead and pulled the door almost shut. As he stepped into the hall, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered with a knot of anticipation in his stomach. "Hello? Mr. Croft? It's Sarah." His breath hitched. He moved further down the hall, away from Leo's room. "Sarah, thank you for calling." "I've been thinking," she said, her voice clear and measured, "about your offer, about Leo." Julian held his breath. "I will come back," she said, "but on 2 conditions." "Name them." "First," she said, "I am no longer your housekeeper. I want a formal contract. As Leo's governess and pediatric aide, my duties will be related only to his care and well-being." "Done," Julian said, without a moment's hesitation. "And second, you will fund the completion of my nursing degree. Not as a gift, but as part of my compensation package. It will be stipulated in the contract." "Yes," he agreed. "That's what I offered. It's what I want." There was a brief silence on the line, then a soft exhale. "All right then," she said. "I'll be there tomorrow morning. But, Mr. Croft?" "Yes?" "We are not going back to how things were. This is a new arrangement. If I ever feel disrespected, or if you ever cross that line again, I will not be quiet. I will walk away, and I will not look back." "I wouldn't expect you to," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "You've earned the right to be heard, and I need to learn how to listen." Another pause. "Good night, Mr. Croft." "Good night, Sarah." He ended the call and stood in the silent hallway for a long time. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a small measure of peace settled over the house. It wasn't a return to normalcy, but something new, something better. The next morning, Leo was awake before dawn, vibrating with an excitement that filled the cavernous house. "Is Sarah coming today?" he asked, bouncing in his chair at the breakfast table. "Yes, she'll be here soon," Julian confirmed, pouring a cup of coffee he felt he had truly earned. "When she comes, can we make her special pancakes?" Leo asked. "She knows how to make the ones that look like bears." "We'll ask her," Julian said, a genuine smile touching his lips. Punctually at 8 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. Julian started towards it, but Leo was a blur of motion, rocketing past him down the hall, arms outstretched. "Sarah!" Sarah stood on the doorstep, dressed in simple trousers and a crisp blouse. She looked rested, and her eyes, though still cautious, held a new resolve. In her hand, she carried a leather portfolio. Leo crashed into her, wrapping his small arms around her waist with a force that made her stumble back. She dropped the portfolio and knelt, hugging him just as tightly. "I missed you so much," Leo mumbled into her shoulder. "I missed you too, little captain," she said, kissing the top of his head. Julian watched from a few feet away, a spectator to a reunion that was both heartwarming and a painful reminder of his failure. When Sarah finally looked up at him, her gaze was professional and direct. The barrier was still there. He deserved it. "Welcome back," he said. "I'm not back," she corrected him gently. "I'm starting over. There's a difference." He nodded, accepting the distinction. "Understood." She retrieved her portfolio and opened it on the hall table. "This is a contract, drafted by a friend in legal aid. I'd like your attorney to review it and have it signed by the end of the day." "I'll take care of it," he promised. Sarah then handed Leo the gray wool scarf Julian had returned. "I believe you left this at my grandmother's," she said to the boy. "You might need it for your adventures." Leo squealed with delight and draped it around his neck like a superhero's cape. Julian watched them, his son spinning in happy circles, Sarah's gaze following him with a soft smile, and something inside him finally settled. Redemption, he was beginning to understand, wasn't a single grand gesture. It was a series of small, humble acts, a contract signed, a boundary respected, a new beginning built one quiet morning at a time. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the Croft mansion changed. It was a shift born of deliberate intention. Sarah no longer used the staff entrance. She didn't wear a uniform. She spoke her mind, offering opinions on Leo's schedule, his diet, and his developmental activities with the confidence of a seasoned professional. And Julian, to his own surprise, found himself listening. He no longer flinched when she disagreed with him. They had drawn new lines, not in sand, but in stone. Leo blossomed under the new arrangement. His laughter seemed to fill the once hollow spaces of the house. He was more curious, more engaged, and every night before bed, he'd ask for a story from Sarah's childhood, a song she learned from her grandmother, or just to be held for a moment. One evening, after Sarah had left for her night class, Julian was tucking Leo in. "Daddy, why do you like Sarah so much?" the boy asked. Julian paused. "Because she makes me feel safe," Leo said simply. The word lingered in Julian's mind. Safe. How long had it been since this house, this life, had felt that way for anyone? That Saturday, Julian took a risk. He invited Sarah to join him and Leo for a trip to the city's science museum. She hesitated at first. "Mr. Croft, I'm not a guest." "And you're not the help either," he countered. "You're Leo's governess, and he wants you to come." She finally agreed. The day was a revelation. In the noisy, chaotic environment of the museum, Julian watched Sarah with a new perspective. She wasn't just supervising Leo, she was teaching him. She explained the principles of gravity using the ball pit and described constellations in the planetarium with the wonder of an astronomer. She moved with an easy grace, a natural authority that had nothing to do with her employment and everything to do with who she was. Over lunch in the museum cafe, they talked. Not about schedules or household matters, but about their lives. She told him about the financial crisis that had forced her to leave school, about caring for her ailing grandmother, about her dream of one day opening a free clinic for children. Julian, in turn, found himself speaking about his wife, Evelyn. He spoke of her illness, of the crushing loneliness that followed, of his profound fear that he was failing as a father. Sarah didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She just listened, her gaze steady and empathetic. For the first time since Evelyn's death, Julian felt heard, without feeling judged. As they were leaving, their hands brushed as he helped her with her coat. This time, the spark was different. It wasn't just a jolt of recognition. It was a flicker of something warmer, something more complex. That night, as he sat in the library with Samuel, the older man observed, "You seem lighter, sir." Julian nodded, staring into the fire. "I didn't realize how heavy everything had become until she walked out that door." Samuel smiled faintly. "Sometimes you have to lose a cornerstone to realize it was holding up the whole house." Julian looked at him. "Do you think I can fix this?" "What's broken isn't the house, sir," Samuel said wisely. "It's the foundation. And Sarah, she's been a part of that foundation since the day she arrived." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "She's going back to school. I'm paying for it." Samuel's smile widened. "Then you're not just fixing, sir. You're building." The peace, however, was soon disturbed. A letter arrived from the prestigious academy where Leo had been enrolled since birth. It was a polite but pointedly cool welcome letter that included a section regarding approved guardians for pickup and school events. It requested confirmation that Miss Jennings meets the Academy's standards for conduct and presentation. The unspoken message was clear. Julian read the letter, his jaw tightening. He showed it to Sarah that evening. She read it, her expression unreadable, and placed it back on the table. "I'm not surprised," she said. "You shouldn't have to expect this," he said, his anger rising. "Not here, not now." Sarah gave him a weary look. "Mr. Croft, wealth doesn't eliminate prejudice. Sometimes it just gives it a more expensive vocabulary." "What do you want me to do?" he asked, feeling powerless. "Do you want me to handle it? Do you want to step back?" The question hung in the air. "No," she said firmly. "I won't be made invisible. Which means you have to decide how loud you're willing to be. Because if I walk my brown skin into that school holding your white son's hand, people will talk. And not all of them will be discreet." "I don't care what they say," he said fiercely. "I care about what Leo sees." Her expression softened. "Then you're going to have to teach him how to see through the noise." The next morning, Julian called the headmaster. He didn't threaten or yell. He spoke with a cold, precise clarity. "Let me be unequivocal," he said. "Sarah Jennings is an integral part of my son's life. She has my complete and total confidence. If I hear so much as a whisper of disrespect towards her from anyone at your institution, you will find that my support, both financial and otherwise, will evaporate. Is that understood?" The headmaster, flustered, stammered his assurances. When Julian hung up, he felt a grim satisfaction. He found Sarah in the garden with Leo, teaching him the names of different herbs. He told her about the call. She looked at him, a long, searching look. "That's going to make waves," she said. "Let them ripple," he replied. She smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her whole face. And in that moment, as the sun warmed their faces, Julian realized this wasn't just about making amends anymore. It was about standing for something, together. The story broke on a Tuesday. It wasn't a front-page exposé, but a carefully worded piece on a popular society blog, tucked between photos of a charity gala and an article on luxury yachting. The headline was subtle and venomous. "Grieving Billionaire's Newfound Governess raises eyebrows at elite academy. Sarah's name wasn't used, but the descriptions were specific enough. A former housekeeper of Southern origin. An unusual and intimate role within the Croft household, to leave no doubt. Julian saw it first. Samuel had printed it out and left it on his desk. A silent offering of bad news. His first instinct was rage, a primal urge to sue, to crush the blogger, to burn the whole system down. He found Sarah on the back terrace, grading papers for one of her online classes. Leo was chasing butterflies on the lawn. She saw the look on his face and knew immediately. "You saw it," she said, her voice flat. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I will handle this." "Don't," she said, cutting him off gently. "I knew this was a possibility. I didn't think it would feel this cheap." They sat in silence for a moment, the cheerful chirping of birds a stark contrast to the ugliness that had invaded their lives. "They're trying to frame this as something sordid," he said, the words tasting like poison. "That I'm involved with you?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant trees. "They're using an old, tired narrative. The one where a woman like me is either a seductress or a victim. They can't comprehend that I could simply be competent." "I'll make them retract it," he insisted. She shook her head. "That will only add fuel to the fire. It will look like we have something to hide." "So we do nothing?" he asked, frustrated. She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and resolute. "No, we do everything. We keep living. I continue to take Leo to school. You continue to look every one of those board members in the eye. We refuse to be shamed by their small, ugly world." His sister, Eleanor, called from London that afternoon. "I read the disgusting little piece," she said without preamble. "And let me tell you, if Sarah were a blonde Swedish au pair, they'd be calling her Mary Poppins. But because she's a black woman with dignity, they have to imply she's a predator. It's pathetic." "What do I do, Elle?" he asked, valuing her blunt assessment. "You don't issue a statement," she said. "You make one. You take Sarah and Leo out in public. You go to the next big school fundraiser and you stand with her, not in front of her. Let them see what a family built on respect, not just blood, actually looks like." The opportunity presented itself a week later. The Academy's annual spring benefit, a black tie affair. When Julian proposed they go, Sarah was hesitant. "I don't belong in a room like that." "You belong anywhere Leo is," he said firmly. "And you belong by my side." The night of the gala, Sarah wore a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald green. It wasn't flashy, but it radiated a quiet confidence. When she walked down the stairs, Julian felt his breath catch. It wasn't just that she was beautiful. It was that she was carrying herself with the grace of a queen who had earned her crown through trials, not birthright. The moment they walked into the ballroom, a hush fell. The whispers were almost audible. Julian could feel the stares, 100 pairs of eyes dissecting them. He kept a hand lightly on the small of Sarah's back, a silent, protective gesture. It didn't take long for the first microaggression. A woman dripping in diamonds approached them, her smile overly bright. "I just have to say," she gushed to Sarah, "you are so incredibly poised. It's just wonderful how you've managed to integrate." Sarah's smile didn't waver. "Integrated? I'm not a new software. I'm a person. I'm Leo's governess." The woman flushed. "Oh, of course, I just meant—" "I know what you meant," Sarah said, her voice still pleasant, but with an unmistakable undertone of steel. She then turned and walked away, leaving the woman sputtering. Julian, who had witnessed the exchange, moved to her side. "You handled that with more grace than she deserved." "It's not the first time I've had to translate polite bigotry," she said with a sigh. They stood near the edge of the dance floor, the glittering chandeliers above them casting a cold light. "I want to do more," Julian said suddenly. "This, fighting back against gossip, it's not enough. I want to build something." Sarah looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "A foundation," he said, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "Scholarships, support systems, for caregivers, for single mothers, for women like you who had their dreams derailed. I can write the checks, but I want it to have a soul. It needs your face, your name." She stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked like hope. She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't say no. 2 days later, Sarah found herself sitting on a park bench, a thin portfolio resting on her lap. Inside were the initial documents Julian had drawn up: a mission statement, a proposed budget, and a vision for what he had tentatively named the Jennings-Croft Foundation. She had read it 3 times. It was audacious. It was everything she had ever dreamed of for others. It proposed funding for childcare so mothers could attend school, mentorship programs, financial literacy workshops, and mental health resources. And there, under the title Executive Director, was her name, Sarah Jennings. She felt as if she were holding the key to a world she had only been allowed to peer into from the outside. But with the key came a new kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of failure. She knew failure intimately. It was the fear of success, of the visibility, of the crushing weight of being the one chosen to represent so many. A young voice broke her reverie. "Are you the lady from the blog?" A teenage girl with bright, curious eyes stood before her. "The one they wrote about?" "I suppose I am," Sarah said cautiously. "My mom read it," the girl said. "She said they were trying to make you sound bad, but it just made you sound strong." Sarah managed a small smile. "Your mom sounds like a smart woman." The girl sat on the other end of the bench. "She's trying to get her nursing certificate, but she had to drop out. Said she couldn't afford the child care." Sarah looked down at the portfolio in her lap. We're working on something for that," she said, the words feeling real for the first time. "For moms like yours." The girl's eyes lit up. "For real?" "For real," Sarah confirmed. That evening, she walked into Julian's study and placed the portfolio on his desk. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. He looked up from his computer. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm ready." He stood and walked towards her. "You won't be alone in this." "I know," she said, "but I want the public face of this to be me. Not because you're hiding, but because they need to see someone who looks like me in charge of her own story." He nodded, understanding completely. "Then we do this our way, quietly, but with force." The foundation launched not with a press conference, but with a series of quiet meetings in community centers and church basements. Sarah, along with a small team she handpicked, began building the infrastructure from the ground up. They interviewed social workers, met with single mothers, and listened. They named it the Jennings Foundation. Sarah had insisted her name stand alone. "This is for women who built legacies without recognition," she'd told Julian. "Let this one be theirs." He hadn't argued. At the first private meeting with potential community partners, Sarah stood before a room of people who had never had to choose between rent and medicine. "This isn't charity," she told them. "It's an investment in equity. We are not offering handouts. We are building ladders." Julian watched from the back, humbled and deeply proud. The gossip had faded, replaced by a new narrative. But not everyone was content to let it go. One morning, As Sarah was dropping Leo off at the academy, the headmaster stopped her. "Miss Jennings," he said, clearing his throat, "I just wanted to say, the foundation. It's truly admirable work." Sarah met his gaze without blinking. "Thank you. I hope your admiration translates into action within these walls. More diverse hiring, a curriculum that reflects all your students, a willingness to listen to the parents who don't sit on your board." He was taken aback. "I'll take that under advisement." "You do that," she said, with a smile that held no apology. Later that night, she and Julian sat on the back steps of the mansion. The house was quiet. "You scared him today," he said with a chuckle. "Good," she replied, sipping her tea. "Some people need to be scared into doing the right thing." She looked up at the stars, a vast, glittering expanse. "I keep thinking about that girl in the park. How many more are out there just waiting for someone to see them?" Julian nodded. "That's what this is now. You're not just building a foundation. You're building a lighthouse." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "And you, Sarah, are the one keeping the flame burning." For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the truth of it. The world hadn't changed overnight, but she had. And because of that, everything else was about to. The lawsuit arrived like a thief in the night, a quiet, venomous attack delivered by a courier on a rainy Tuesday. It wasn't a surprise, but the cold, legalistic language still felt like a punch to the gut. The plaintiff was a disgruntled board member from the academy, a man whose sneer had followed Sarah down the hallways since her first day there. The charge was undue influence, a baseless claim that she had manipulated a grieving Julian Croft for personal and financial gain, leveraging her position to launch her foundation. "So I'm being sued for being successful while black," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion as she read the document in Julian's study. "They're trying to delegitimize you," Julian said, his voice tight with fury. "And in doing so, they're trying to paint me as an incompetent fool. They want to shame me into cutting you loose." "And will you?" she asked, her gaze lifting to meet his. He scoffed, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "I'm going to bury them. I'll hire the most ruthless legal team in the country. We'll counter-sue for defamation. I will ruin this man." "No," Sarah said quietly. Julian stopped pacing. "What do you mean, no? This is a war, Sarah." "It is," she agreed. "But you can't win it with your weapons. If you fight them with money and power, you validate their narrative, that this is all a transaction. This battle has to be fought on my terms." Before he could argue, his sister Eleanor strode into the room. She'd flown in from London the moment she heard the news. "She's right," Eleanor said, pointing a finger at him. "You need to step back and let her lead. This isn't your fight to win. It's hers to define." And so, Sarah made her move. She didn't hire a high-powered PR firm. She called a press conference and held it in the basement of a community center in Oak Haven, the same space where her foundation had held its first support group for single mothers. The room was packed. When Sarah stepped to the podium, a hush fell. She wore a simple dress and a pendant that had belonged to her mother. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and unwavering. "There has been a great deal of speculation about my journey," she began, "about my worth and my right to be in the rooms I now occupy. So allow me to be clear. I came to the Croft household as a caregiver. I loved a child through the darkest time of his life. That love was not a strategy. It was a sacrament. And I will not apologize for it." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "I am the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's houses so I could have a chance to own my own. I am the granddaughter of a woman who picked cotton under a sun that did not care if she burned. I am not ashamed of where I come from. I am fortified by it. What I have built is not a scandal. It is a testament to what is possible when you refuse to accept the limitations others place on you. She leaned into the microphone. To those who have filed this lawsuit, I have a message. You cannot shame me with the story of my own survival. You cannot weaponize my success against me. And if you think a courtroom will silence me, you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my strength. It was not given to me in a boardroom. It was forged in the fire, and I am not afraid to burn. The room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of support, of recognition. Julian watched from the side, tears welling in his eyes. He had never seen anything so powerful. That night, the lawsuit was quietly withdrawn. No explanation was given, but the message was clear. They had aimed for her character and hit a mountain. The fallout from the press conference was immediate and profound. A clip of her speech went viral, shared by everyone from celebrities to grassroots activists. Donations poured into the Jennings Foundation. But more importantly, letters began to arrive. Dozens of them, handwritten, heartfelt. I am a domestic worker. You spoke for me. I am a single mother. You gave me hope. I am a young black woman who was told to be quiet. I will not be quiet anymore. Sarah read every single one. Each letter was a thread, weaving her personal story into a larger tapestry of shared experience. One afternoon, she sat with Julian on the porch, a pile of letters on the table between them. I didn't intend for any of this, she said softly. I know, he said. That's why it's so powerful. It's authentic. You've become a symbol, Sarah. I don't want to be a symbol, she replied. I want to be a resource. And so, she expanded her work. The foundation launched the Bridge Project, a national mentorship program connecting young women of color with established professionals. She was invited to speak at universities, at policy forums, at the National Equity Summit in Washington, D.C. She stood on stages where she was the only black woman, her voice ringing with a clarity and moral authority that could not be ignored. She never lost her softness, but she had honed her strength into a precision instrument. One evening, Julian found her sketching in a notebook. It was a design for a large building, a retreat center nestled in the countryside. What's this? He asked. It's the next step, she said. A place for women to rest. Not just to heal from trauma, but to rest, to dream, to build community. A place that feels like a home they've never had. Where will you build it? He asked. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. I was hoping you'd help me find the land. He smiled. I think I already have. They broke ground on the retreat, which she named the Meadow, the following spring. It was a community effort. Volunteers, many of them women who had been helped by the foundation, came to paint, to garden, to build. Sarah was there every day, not as a supervisor, but as a fellow worker, her hands covered in dirt and paint. The day it opened, the air was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of barbecue. Women from all walks of life mingled on the wide, wraparound porch. Sarah stood to the side, watching, her heart full. Leo, now a bright and confident 7-year-old, ran up and hugged her. We built a home, Sarah, he said proudly. Yes, we did, little captain, she whispered, kissing his head. Later that evening, as the stars began to appear in the vast country sky, Julian found her sitting on a bench overlooking the meadow. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Do you remember the day I came to your grandmother's house?" he asked. "I remember every second of it," she said. "I was a different man then," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Broken, arrogant, blind. You, Sarah, you taught me how to see." He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "I know our beginning was a disaster, but I am asking, with all the humility I have learned from you, if you would consider giving us a proper beginning. As partners, in this life, in this work, in everything." He wasn't holding a ring, but he was offering her his entire world. Sarah looked from his earnest face to the lights of the retreat glowing in the valley, a constellation of hope she had brought to life. She thought of her mother, of her grandmother, of the long line of women whose quiet strength ran in her veins. She had not just found her voice, she had built a world where that voice could be heard. And here, beside her, was a man who had learned to listen. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy tracing paths down her cheeks. "Yes." And in the quiet of the meadow, under a sky full of stars, two worlds, once separated by a chasm of pride and prejudice, finally, beautifully, became one.